Welcome to the Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark, where we learn to accept living in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV, we relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We share information about the facts of radiation and the nuclear industry. We discuss vital current events and explore the roots of social engineering that has caused so many of our beloved friends and family to intentionally ignore the most critical, catastrophic event in human history. We interview activists who do the hard work to discover the truth and get the word out. We dispose the NRC's daily nuclear alerts and take phone calls from our listeners in an effort to fully engage on all topics that are changing our world. We explore exactly how radiation affects our bodies and minds to dissipate your fears and face the truth. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear. We share information on how to take your life back from the systems intent on enslaving our bodies, minds, and souls. The Age of Fission radio show will create a venue that all will choose in order to actively engage to save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. Let me say that again, UCY.TV radio listeners. I want to be clear so that people will understand that this is UCY.TV, so that when they go to the internet to look for our radio station, they can adequately find us. You can also find us on the YouTube. Our producer, Jules, posts every radio show on YouTube. Many of you already know this, but some of you may not, so I decided to mention that. Welcome to the end of the week. It's September 4th, 2015. My name is Lonnie Clark, and you're listening to the Age of Fission radio show. On Fridays, as you know, it's Call-In Friday. The format of my show, I'm on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. On Monday, I read to you nuclear alerts and bring you news that I find interesting, kind of give my take on the news. On Wednesdays, I do interviews, and on Fridays, it's Call-In Friday so that the people who listen to this radio show can engage. Now, what that means is it's kind of a crapshoot. Maybe somebody will call in, someone won't. So I'm always prepared to talk about whatever's on my heart and in my mind. And there is a lot of news going on and a lot of bullshit, to be honest. This is why people come to alternative radio, because we're sick of being force-fed the propaganda, and it's really just gone beyond propaganda. It's worldwide fascism. We are living in a world where people are being bombarded every single day in America with our tax dollars. Our war machine is killing people all over the planet. We have a government that's completely out of control. I wanted to read to you the preface of a book that I read on my YouTube channel, and it's called Population Control Through Nuclear Pollution. It was written by Arthur R. Tamplin and John W. Goffman. It's pretty quick, but it really speaks to the urgency today. It was written in 1972, and because this information was summarily ignored, the warnings in this introduction have been are even more urgent. Men must solve the environmental crisis which threatens our planet. We are optimistic that this can be accomplished, provided men know the dimensions of the problem they face. The first step is to understand how we have arrived at the very present sorry state of affairs. We must appreciate the dynamic which operates against solution of the environmental crisis. Finally, we can come to grips with procedures that can lead us out of the morass that has been created. Much of this book deals with the atomic technology and its associated irreversible nuclear pollution of the planet. In large measure, this emphasis is the result of our personal experiences. We learn that the nature of the environmental crisis through our own experiences is endeavoring to protect the public health with respect to nuclear pollution. The lessons to be learned from nuclear pollution are general lessons, applicable with equal force to every aspect of the environmental crisis generated by modern science and technology. We are indeed hopeful that our experiences and observations may lead to constructive solutions of the critical environmental problems facing the human species. That was written in 1972 and summarily ignored, to the point now where we are literally off the charts. We have grotesquely changed our environment. We have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people being bombed every day. The news came out last week that 6 million people in our own country have been exposed to uranium, which I find kind of interesting because we've known for quite a while that tritium is leaking into the New York City aquifer, that from Indian Point it's leaking tritium, and they're trying to tell people there that it's fine, perfectly fine. And that leads us into the whole idea of we are not being warned one little iota about anything that really is damaging to our health. I mean, I go to several alternative news sites on a regular basis to catch up, to see what people who are really digging into the news can say. Let me give you out the number in case anybody out there listening has been anxiously waiting to call in on Call-In Friday before I get to any of these news stories. So the call-in number is 718-717-8296, and you feel free to give me a call. This is how I run the Call-In Friday call-ins. I can take up to 2 calls at a time. We can engage in a three-person conversation if you like. I don't cut anybody off. I'm really fascinated what listeners have to say. Many people call me an, quote, activist, and I actually don't view myself as an activist. I view myself as a human being. I believe that this is my duty to speak out. I really was like millions of Americans, on the little rat wheel, going to work, trying to do my best, getting myself together, and working through the PTSD of my own childhood, which, frankly, I'm still working on. But I actually, when Fukushima happened, I decided I could not stay silent on the nuclear issue, and I had to dig in and get involved. In the early 2000s, when Bush stole the election, I actually got very actively engaged in trying to put pressure on Congress on my own, to put pressure on Congress to impeach Bush and Cheney. I ran my fax line out to the street, and I had these letters prepared to demand impeachment hearings, and I wanted action. And my neighbors knocked on my door and told me to stop it. I put up signs encouraging people in my little town of Eugene to come on Saturday, and it's a free fax line. Fax your representative. Let's let them hear from us. My neighbors, including a Tibetan priest. I couldn't believe it. There was a little temple around the corner from my house. They actually knocked on my door and told me to stop it. They took my signs down around town. They told me that they did not want strangers coming into their neighborhood, which I found ironic because I'm from Los Angeles, right? And LA is like millions of people, and I'm in this little tiny town of maybe 80,000 people, which I find it is the smallest place I've ever lived in my life. I mean, you can drive through Eugene in 15 minutes. And I was stunned. I actually said to the priest, when the Tibetan monk guy, when he knocked at my door and said, well, we really don't want people coming in this neighborhood. I said, it feels like I'm living in a closed, like Orange County, where you can't do jack. If you do anything down there, the police harass you. They said, well, we are kind of a closed community, which that really spoke to me about what was going on in America. And I had no idea then how deep the denial was until Fukushima. You know, I created a little acronym called ROAR, Restore Our American Reputation. It's still up on Facebook. It doesn't get any activity. I somewhat ignore it. I really made an effort when Facebook came out to start ROAR so we could get pressure. I was still, you know, I guess, what do they call that, wet behind the ears, where I really, really believed that if we all got together and we had millions of people, we could demand this. And no, that's actually not how it's going to go. They're going to collapse under their own weight. They don't give a crap about us. And that has been every story on these. You can go to Main Street and you can go to the alternative media. The net result is all the same. The people in power don't give a crap about any of us. We are all 100% disposable. And if we get out of line, we are going to be exiled or thrown in jail. And, you know, Chelsea Manning is spending the rest of her life in jail. Why? Because she outed a video showing U.S. soldiers murdering journalists and children. But that wasn't supposed to get out, so she went to jail. And honestly, the whole thing is just outrageous. I mean, it is indicative of what's going on in Fukushima, folks. Like, there are people, the children of Japan are exposed to such unconscionable rates of cesium-137. We are going to have a drop-off. They're going to drop off like flies in 10 years. And any conscionable person will say that really, what are the powers that be going to do about it? And I think they're happy about it. I think the people that are running the show are quite pleased with themselves. And, you know, there's a lot of political theater. That leads me to this story that says, why ending homelessness is political poison. This is on truthdig.com. And really, it is a really sad story about the state of affairs, because it talks about how in the United States, the problem of homelessness is immense. The National Center on Homelessness and Poverty estimates that in the United States, 2.5 million to 3.5 million people sleep in shelters, in temporary transitional housing, on sidewalks, in parks, underneath freeways, on buses, in trains. An additional 7.4 million. So let me add those numbers up. 2.5, 3.5, 7.4. That's a total of 13.4 million people. An additional 7.4 million people, the center says, are living with relatives or friends after having lost their own homes. These figures are far from exact because they come from several different sources, with each of their own way of counting the homeless, but they reflect the depth of the problem. We have a serious problem. I mean, I know here in Eugene, they're at least attempting to do something about the homelessness. We have what I call little shanty towns where they let people set up camps during the winter because you can't break your tent down in the rain and set it back up. It just destroys everything. So they allow these people to set up little camps, and they don't let them set up for long. They allow them to live there for a month or 2 months, and then boom, out of a sudden, the cops raid them and throw them out. It's a big trauma for everybody involved. Most of the time, it is elderly people and, you know, handicapped people, people who really have no capacity to work. It is really a despicable issue that goes on in our country and just around the world. Add that 13.4 million people in the United States that are housing insecure, that have no way to, you know. In fact, on the YouTube channel, on the YouTube community, there is a channel that I was following called Weeping Willow 2, WHEEPING, WILLOW 2. Her name is Carol. Her house, she basically, J.P. Morgan sent her a bill and for $40,000. And her house was exempted in a bankruptcy. They allowed her to keep her house. And when the economic collapse happened in 2008, her loan got sold to Capital One, and all of a sudden they sent her a bill for $40,000. And she's a woman living in Kentucky that's on disability, has no way to pay the $40,000. They never had a contract. She's been fighting them in court since 2008. And just recently, she has lost all hope of winning her case, and she will be evicted from her house for over $40,000 of a made-up bill. She had her house. It was hers free and clear. The economic collapse happened. She actually has documented proof that the signature was forged. She sent it to, of course, she's in Kentucky, her congressmen, her senators, and those neocons, they're all for J.P. Morgan, so they don't care. And she's about to lose her house, and the way she feels, she's going to not let them come take her. She's, in Kentucky, they got their guns, and she is willing to fight for her house, which frightens me because I don't think she even understands the level of threat that she's putting herself under. The likelihood is she kind of believes she's going to shoot to the death. They're not going to take me alive. Well, they could easily take her alive, and she could spend the rest of her life in prison for threatening police officers. And this is a woman whose house has been attacked. This is the state of affairs in the United States of America. It is beyond unconscionable that we wake up every day, go to work, and just ignore it. And that is why, folks, you are listening to UCY Radio, because we are people who come to this station looking for alternative ideas. Let me give you the number again. The number to call in and engage on any of these topics is 718-717-8296. I'm just going to keep going. I can, push my button. I can just keep talking because I have a lot on my heart and a lot on my mind. The other day I read to you a poem from The Way of Life, right? I wanted to talk to you about the books that have dramatically changed my life and improved my life. I think I've mentioned to you The Four Agreements. It is written by Don Miguel Ruiz, and it is based on ancient Toltec society's philosophy, essentially. And it basically allows people to run their lives in a way that we can manage life. And again, it's interesting because The Way of Life by Lao Tzu was written 600 years before Christ. This technology was written over a millennia ago by the Nuvals, who were they were actually forced to conceal their wisdom so that they could not get slaughtered by the Europeans. And the whole idea is that we live, all of us have our own spiritual path, and we live in our own way. And, they talk about the domestication of the planet and how we have what attention is. And attention is the ability to discriminate and focus only on what we want to perceive. And that's exactly where we're at on our planet. This is the reason why the nuclear cartel is able to get away with what they have. I was reading some comments on an article that I was reading about nuclear shutting down Pilgrim, and someone was saying, a pro-nuclear guy was saying, I'm really sick of these people not understanding science and, not understanding that nuclear just isn't that harmful. Well, that man's point of view, he completely believes the IAEA. He has not done his homework. That person did not understand that the IAEA has been suppressing real science ever since its inception, since it actually has turned its back on humanity for power and for war. In 1957, the IAEA joined the United Nations. In 1959, the World Health Organization signed a contract with the IAEA saying that they had authority over all of the documents that the World Health Organization produced. And what happened was it was really not a problem for the IAEA until Chernobyl. When Chernobyl happened, the accident was so catastrophic that the scientists were actually suppressed from, the doctors were suppressed from going into Chernobyl for 5 years. When they went in, their information again was suppressed. Much of their information was not allowed to be disclosed. So some of the doctors and some reporters started the world. It was called Independent WHO, and I recommend that website to anybody who wants to find out about the real history of the IAEA and understand the depth of the control that these folks have in our lives. And it is not just the nuclear issue. It is, as John Goffman alluded to, it is the entire modern technology industry. I had a conversation with my ex-husband the other day, and he was talking about how he doesn't believe acupuncture is real science. I did not engage him on this one because it's kind of a waste of time to talk to somebody who's, I know his mind, he will not be changed. But the idea that there's real science and not real science, when we have a scientific community that is willing to diagnose a janitor at the University of Oklahoma with mold exposure after he picks up nuclear material, is beyond comprehension. Let me explain that. On Monday, when I read my nuclear alerts, I read a story that happened within the last month of a janitor in Enid, Oklahoma. And this janitor was cleaning out a room, found a heavy box, it fell to the floor, and he picked up these vials. And by the time he picked them up and turned them over, he saw this sign that said hot nuclear radioactivity. He dropped them to the floor near his feet. They called the university security. They came and got the material. The guy immediately started vomiting, was nauseous. His hands went severely arthritic. His feet broke out with blisters. The end of the nuclear alert said, "No worries, the guy was diagnosed with an overexposure to mold." An overexposure to mold. Like, when I read that, my eyes popped out of my head. What doctor would actually diagnose an overexposure to mold when a person has been exposed to radioactivity? That is beyond. They gave him a cortisol shot. Cortisone, I guess it's a cortisone shot that basically numbs out all your nerve endings and you can't feel anything. So, that story has really, really, really stuck in my head. And after the tax season ends, I am going to do some digging and try to find that man and see where he's at, because we will be then 3 or 4 months down the road. My guess would be this gentleman in 3 to 4 months from that event will begin to show signs of severe illness if he came in that direct contact. But this is the community that we have to deal with. Excuse me. So, again, let me give you the number in case anybody's too shy to call in. You can please call in at 718-717-8296. I'd really love to engage somebody on any of these topics. The call-in Friday is kind of an awkward day because I'm hoping someone will call in. The interesting part about UCY.TV radio is that we don't really, there's no gauge on how many people, we have no idea, essentially, because we're on the internet, how many people listen. If you look at my video watching, I think it's like 50 or 60, sometimes it's 30. But, it could be there's a lot more because people don't always go to the YouTube, so we have no idea. So I would really love to engage people. The number is 718-717-8296. And I'm just going to keep going because I did come prepared this morning in case nobody called in to talk about some issues that are affecting our country and our world. Everyone's talking about this refugee crisis. This whole thing is just, in my view, a setup so that we have an excuse to get actively engaged. The headlines on The Guardian this morning are hundreds set off from Budapest on foot. And the reason these people are leaving these countries of Yemen and Syria is because the United States and the United Kingdom are providing bombs and weapons to Saudi Arabia and to other nations to kill these people and to drive them off their lands. And really, the point is to really create an international crisis so that they have an excuse to take us off to war. I mean, we're already at war. We have Our government really is the war machine around the world. And, you know, as much as we like to say that the Russians and the Chinese are scary, the United States spends far, 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 far more on weaponry and in our military than any other country on the planet. And we exercise, you know what happens when you have a lot of power is you exercise it. And it's absolutely unconscionable. You know, we have the Dumb and Dumberer show going on here. I was looking at the headlines from thehill.com, and it's all about the Republican Party. When every single poll that has been taken shows that Bernie Sanders wins against the Republicans and wins most of them. He's gaining speed on. The reason Bernie Sanders is not winning against Hillary Clinton is because he is basically being suppressed by the DNC. You know, his hands have been tied behind his back. The DNC wants to anoint Hillary Monsanto Westinghouse Clinton. And America's just not having it. You know, I mean, personally, I don't understand the appeal of Donald Trump. He has bankrupted every single thing he has ever touched. And maybe that's what I think. I think the reason people like Donald Trump is because he survived after bankruptcy repeatedly. So I think in the back of their head, they're thinking, we're bankrupt, so maybe he can figure out how to make us what we were before. Well, what we were before was a country with compassion. We had a country where we had a good social system. We actually supported and funded our schools. We encouraged people to get an education. 50 years ago, people didn't go into debt just to get an education. You know, I myself am racking up the debt as I'm going to college. I anticipate probably by the time I get out of law school having $100,000 of debt by the time I'm 70 years old. I turn 60 in October, and I go to school part-time because I work. I have to support myself. And the student loan funding is just not enough, and I cannot abandon my clients. So it's unconscionable what we are doing to our planet, to our people. The question is, it's not just about how do we get people awake, how do we get people actively engaged? Again, speaking of actively engaged, let me give you this number. It's 718-717-8296. You know, I know in the last 2 years when we've put on nuclear protests, anti-nuclear protests, we've gone up to Corvallis. There have been protests around the country. Nobody just shows up. I mean, even the protest, the Mothers for Peace in California when they went to Diablo Canyon to shut down Diablo Canyon, which, by the way, needs to be shut down prontito. There was very few people. If you look at their videos, there was like a handful of people, less than 50 people out of millions and millions of people. And we have people in our country who are negatively affected by radiation and do nothing. We now have 6 million people in the middle of our country who are being told directly, you have uranium in your water, and we do not see 6 million people standing up demanding that the government figure out a way to get that out of our water. They must be doing it. That's what we're thinking. Well, maybe for sure they're working on it. I mean, let's be clear. They're not working on it. They are definitely not working on it. The feds charged 3 in an alleged green energy Ponzi scheme. They're going after Solandra, no doubt. This one was really interesting. Judge orders rule on foreign energy payments. So a lot of people don't understand this. A federal judge ordered financial regulators Wednesday to move forward on a long-delayed rule that would require oil, natural gas, and mining companies to disclose payments to foreign governments. So we have oil, natural gas, and mining companies making payments to foreign governments. Congress told the SEC to write the regulation in 2010 as part of the Dodd-Frank financial reform law. But it's been tied up in the controversy and litigation by oil interests, and the SEC has pushed past a number of deadlines, angering groups like Oxfam America, which filed a lawsuit in Massachusetts federal court to get the ball rolling on the rule. This is in the Hill, you guys. All this information is easily found. And the question is really, what do we do with the information? I mean, how do we actually move past it? And I am more and more, since I've been involved in this Fuku fight, this is why I did Roar. This is why I used to spend days just faxing to every single congressman, every single senator. I mean, I would spend days just sending the same letter, faxing it. This is in the old days when you had to punch your numbers in. You didn't have the e-faxing. You just sent it to 1 million people. And I really believed that it would matter if they heard from us. What ended up happening is I got investigated by the Capitol Police. They thought I was an organization, and I wasn't. It was just me. But my voice is pretty strong, and my heart is really committed to compassion and humanity. And it is really up to us to get off our asses and get going and put pressure on these people. You know, if you have not done so already, please do go to the nrc.gov and look for the linear no threshold. Go to the public comments and make a comment about the linear no threshold versus hormesis theory that they are considering. And this is something that we can stop. Now, I noticed last week that they basically extended the comment period to November 19th. It was going to be September 8th. You know, the NRC doesn't do anything for the best interest of the American people or the planet. So my guess is that we actually did get a lot of people making comments telling them to screw off, that we need to, like, even though the radiation is really bad, even though it's off the charts because of Fukushima and all the other decrepit nuclear power plants that are falling apart, we still have an obligation to measure the radiation and to at least warn people of the damage that they are doing. So my guess is the reason they extended the comment period is they want to give all of their cronies, I mean, there's 2 million people in the nuclear industry. So how many of them are in the United States? Probably quite a few. So they're going to give them time to fill in the comments. And my guess would be every single nuclear power plant is mandating that these people contact the NRC and make their comments on behalf of the hormesis theory. I can't prove that, but that would be my guess based on the history of these people who regularly, all the technologies now, all the technology industries, all the pharmaceutical industries, they all go by the 90% rule. And even the medical industry, where they really basically underreport the negative effects of radiation by 90% and deny that radiation causes harm, which is why some doctor was able to diagnose a man who held nuclear radioactive contaminants in his hand, dropped to his feet, and they actually diagnosed him with mold. I just can't get over that one, folks. Like, that just keeps hitting me right in the head every time I even think about those nuclear alerts. That I know it's one human being, and in the big picture of the millions and people who were being killed by our bombs and the drones and the atrocities and the torture, I know that it is really one person, but that speaks volumes to just their general attitude and the control that the nuclear industry has over the conscience of a doctor and a physician. We actually had a physician in this country diagnosing a person who was exposed to radiation. That doctor diagnosed him with overexposure to mold and gave him a cortisone shot, sent him along his way and said, "You're fine, just fine." Unbelievable and unconscionable, folks. So I must have had some type of forethought, because today I came pretty prepared thinking, what if nobody calls in? So I sort of had a lot of different things to talk about. Let me give you that number again in case anybody gets their courage feed on and wants to talk on the radio. It's 718-717-8296. You know, it is an interesting thing when we have Americans who actively pay attention but don't actively engage. That's a really fascinating thing for me, because I know on my YouTube channel, and I've seen other YouTube channels like Miss Milky the Clown, for example, She's got like 5, 6, 7,000 viewers, people who go to her regularly and watch her alerts, which if you don't know Miss Milky the Clown 1 or Miss Milky the Clown 2, I think her current channel is Miss Milky the Clown 1 or 2. You really, honestly, I think she has actually changed the way that the news reporting is done. She compiles bits of information about the nuclear industry and inserts a little bit of humor and music and things that actually make all this stuff palatable. I have not watched her full video from yesterday. It's about an hour and a half. She does have information about the WIP, the WIP program that is out of control in New Mexico. If anybody thinks that the WIPP is under control in New Mexico, you're sorely mistaken. They basically just froze everything, and they're trying to figure it out. It's on Wednesday, Mimi Gurman was on the radio interview here the other day, and she was talking about how the problem up in Hanford is so out of control because in the early days of the nuclear industry, they were just mixing in regular waste from other industries in with the nuclear, and they were just pouring it all in these barrels and sitting it aside, and they really didn't understand the science, and they grossly neglected science, essentially. They neglected what they were supposed to be doing. So that now, fast forward 30, 40 years, we have these barrels up in Hanford that can't be moved, can't be put into safer containers. All they can take is, they can just take the containers that they're in and put them into new containers at best. And that is even a risky thing. They're scared to death to even move them. And my guess would be that method of gross negligence is permeated throughout the entire nuclear industry, probably the coal industry, the whole energy technology industry. They just operate on gross negligence. Like, seriously, total gross, just like the medical industry. There's a really great book called Death by Medicine, and it chronicles how there's almost 1 million people in the United States every single year that die at the hands of medical practitioners or because of their misdiagnosis. I guess that's at the hands of a medical practitioner. But it is extremely urgent that we find a way to get the conscience. I mean, Thomas Ackerman talks about the conscience all the time. And I think it's extremely urgent that we get people to act on their conscience and to redevelop their conscience. I mean, I find it fascinating that people will wake up first thing in the morning and go right to Facebook, start looking at all these posts, passing around these pictures of whatever it is. I mean, the latest meme on Facebook is that little child who washed up on the shores of Syria. And that's just like the current meme. It's just like we pass on from one thing to the next to the next. There's just so many atrocities being perpetrated on the planet that we as human beings are grotesquely overwhelmed. And maybe this is why God placed this in my heart. But, my childhood was quite traumatic. When you grow up in an environment where you don't have loving parents, my parents loved us, but they were mentally ill. I mean, I'll just put it straight up. They had no concept. They had 8 kids in 9.5 years, and it was not fun. But what happened as a child is you just check out. Like you begin to think that that's normal because you've never known anything else. I never forget the time I was 13. I had my very first boyfriend, and I went to his house to meet his mom and dad, and they invited me over for dinner. I was so dumbfounded at how nice his parents were to him. They talked to him with respect. I was like, what? I had never seen adults talk to children with respect in my entire life. And they weren't treated like little slaves. They didn't have to do all the work. I mean, there was no threat of violence on a daily basis. There was no yelling, no berating. It was really an astounding fact for me that happened in that time. I morphed out of that because I began to see that at the age of 13, for the first time in my life, things weren't all the same. And I think this is where we're at in the United States. We have a country that is extremely isolated. We don't have neighbors on our doors. We don't have people coming and going on a regular basis who believe that they belong to us. You know, in Europe, they have all these little tiny countries next to each other, and everybody feels completely independent of each other. In the United States, we view ourselves as one nation under God, but we view ourselves as one nation, and ironically, the Native Americans who lived here long before we did and who actually taught our founding fathers about democracy actually have no voice. And in fact, the people that are being exposed to the uranium and to the WIP, they're Native Americans. So the assault from the nuclear industry is it's a direct hit on the Native American population of our country. Let me give you that number again in case you want to call in. It's 718-717-8296. If anybody wants to engage with me on any of these things that I'm talking about, I would love that. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep going and talking to you about some of these things that are really on my heart, because we have to take action. This whole idea, that especially in, you know, when we are told that we have 13.4 million people in America that don't have a place to live, and nobody does anything about it. You know, surely some of the people listening, if 13.4 million people in this country are housing insecure, that means that there's a likelihood that somebody listening to this radio show is probably housing insecure. I mean, this is a huge problem. But part of why it stays a problem, and this is what this article outlines, and this is written by Bill Boyarsky on truthdig.com. It's called Why Ending Homelessness is Political Poison. It's basically talking about the whole idea that just talking about being in homelessness reminds people of the Great Depression. And they don't want to remember it. Meanwhile, the Republican-controlled Congress, particularly the House, cruelly slashed federal funds for the subsidies that help pay for housing for the poor. And in fact, that's what got me investigated by the Capitol Police. It was in 2009. This was in 2007 that he's talking about this. I called Mike Pence's office. He was a congressman. He's now the governor of his state, but at that time he was a congressman. You know, it's like a little revolving door. They just keep playing the same game, different hat. And I told him his vote against extending the unemployment benefits for people who lost their job would maybe get some, make some people starve to death or freeze to death in the winter. I was investigated by the Capitol Police. They lied about me and said I threatened to murder their staff. The cruelty of the people in office against just the average American is, if you are not clicking your heels and licking their shoes, you don't matter. My own senator, Ron Wyden, won't answer my phone. When I call, I have to block my number before they will pick it up. And they hear my voice, they're like, oh, yes, Ms. Clark, we know about you. We'll tell him. That's always what they say. Well, we'll pass it on. This is another thing that's happened in America. If any of you call your congressmen and your senators, when you do, you will not get straight answers out of them. I was infuriated when I found that out. It's beyond belief. You will call up and say, what's the senator's position on the TPP? Well, he hasn't made a decision. Well, I can't really discuss that. Well, we really don't know. We can't tell you. We call our congressmen in our senator's office, and they literally tell us they cannot tell us their point of view over the phone. It is unconscionable. We're paying their salaries. They're supposed to be our representatives. So this whole thing that we have a representative democracy is a bunch of bullshit, because we don't. And we're finding that one out, like many people. So there's another story that I was looking at, and it's called Whistleblowers File $100 Million Lawsuit Against the NSA and the FBI And this is written by Klaus Mare, M-A-R-R-E, on whowhatandwhy.com. Oh, no, it's not .com. It's whowhatwhy.org. And I believe that this is the web page for Russ Baker, who, if you guys have not read his book, it's called The Family of Secrets, the history of the secret American government. And it really outlines how the Bush crime family has ascended to basically rule the country, which is why Jeb Bush is even being considered for president. Because it's just assumed Jeb Bush or Hillary Clinton are going to be president because they're part of the Bush crime family. So the article outlines this. It says in a $100 million lawsuit that has garnered virtually no public attention, 5 National Security Agency whistleblowers are accusing the federal government of illegally retaliating against them for alerting the NSA and Congress to a waste of taxpayer funds that benefited a well-connected contractor. The lawsuit tells the story of the infancy of the NSA's efforts to surveil the internet. Back then, there were 2 programs for the spying agency to choose from. The first was called ThinThread. It had been developed internally and was comparatively inexpensive, had been tested and proven to be effective, and included safeguards preventing the spying on Americans without a court warrant. The other was called Trailblazer. It did not include safeguards yet and had not yet been shown to be effective, and the cost was 1,000 times more than ThinThread. Instead of being internally developed, it was outsourced to Science Applications International Corporation, a politically connected contractor. The NSA chose Trailblazer. Very interesting. In response, 4 NSA employees who had worked on ThinThread, as well as a congressional staffer, alerted Congress and the Office of the Inspector General of the NSA that the agency was wasting taxpayer funds. This is when their troubles began, according to the lawsuit. It alleges that the defendants, which include the FBI, the NSA, and the Department of Justice, as well as individuals associated with them, knowingly and intentionally fabricated a claim that the plaintiffs leaked classified information to the New York Times reporter Eric Lichtbau and James Risen. Oh, we've heard of James Risen. I'm sure many of you know about James Risen. So basically what they're saying is that because they blew the whistle, the FBI, the NSA, and the Department of Justice, or as I like to call them, the Department of Injustice, all made up information, knowingly and intentionally fabricated a claim that they leaked information. Back to this story. The defendants used this fabricated claim for retaliation, illegal searches and seizures, physical invasion of their residences and places of business, temporary false imprisonment, the confiscation of their property, cancellation of security clearances leading to the loss of their jobs and employment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, harassment, and intimidation. It also states that the defendants should have known that the plaintiffs were not the leaks because the NSA was tracking all domestic telephone calls for the supposed purpose of protecting national security. The plaintiffs are former NSA employees Thomas Drake, Ed Loomis, J. Kirk Wiebe, William Biney, and former congressional staffer Diane Rourke. So they went after a congressional staffer as well. Wow. They seek punitive damages in excess of $100 million because of the defendants' callous and reckless indifference and malicious acts, as well as an additional $15 million for lost wages and to cover costs. We know which those costs are. That's their attorney's costs, who get probably, 50 or 40% of that $15 million. Larry Klayman, the prominent conservative public interest attorney and founder of Judicial Watch, filed the suit on August 20th. However, it is expected to be amended this week, and it is possible that the additional publicity for the case will be sought for them. Claimant has separately used the government over the bulk. Claimant has separately sued the government over the bulk collection of phone records of Americans, and we know how that went. The lawsuit suffered a setback last week when the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit sent it back to the lower court. The 3 judges ruled that claimant could not prove that his own records had been collected and that his standing to file such a suit was therefore in doubt. Reached for a brief comment, claimant told Who, What, Why that the ruling was bullshit. Really? We all know it's all bullshit. So it is an astounding fact, folks, that we just have these whistleblowers people who are working for the government and are attempting to really just disclose the fact that they're not just digging into the coffers to enrich themselves. They're gouging into the coffers. It is gross. It's thievery. That's actually what it is. It's thievery. They don't care who they harm. Like I said earlier, Chelsea Manning went to jail because she outed U.S. soldiers. I mean, these people, they were rewarded for murdering people. And this is the country that we believe is the leader of the free world. It's all kind of it's not even a sick joke. It is really a crime against humanity, just like the nuclear cartel. This is a crime against humanity. When we have a janitor at Enid, Oklahoma, at a university at Enid, Oklahoma, who picks up radioactivity, and Enid, Oklahoma was never licensed for nuclear radioactivity, ever. It was not even supposed to be on the campus. Some janitor stumbles along it. And the NRC did not disclose how old that was. They didn't talk about the history. There is nothing about it. Oops, they just found some radioactivity. Very interesting. It's just sitting right there. A janitor picks it up, gets exposed, and they have a doctor, an actual MD, an actual doctor diagnosing the guy with overexposure to mold. If that doesn't speak volumes to the depth of the problem and how deep the collusion, the coercion, the corruption is in this culture, in this civilization, it is a pathetic statement of affairs. And it really speaks to why in this current 6th level extinction event that we are experiencing right now on our planet, mammals are dropping off at a faster rate than any other extinction level event ever happened. When the dinosaurs died off, they did not die off as fast as mammals are right now on this planet. And that's because we have just been pushed over the barrel. You know, we're in a barrel falling down Niagara Falls, and we have not hit rock bottom yet. And when we do, it's going to be a sad state of affairs. You know, I'm not exactly what I would call a prepper, but I will tell you what, people need to get prepared. I mean, you need to have at least a crank radio with a crank flashlight. You need to be able to store water. You need to have seeds. You need to be able to protect yourself. Build up a small supply of what you can, because who knows how long this whole balloon is going to stand for. You know, many of us believe that we are going to have a serious collapse or some type of, Dick Cheney told us this week that there's something coming and it's going to be worse than 9/11. That's the thing about these fucking rat bastards. They got no problem telling us the facts, because guess what? It's like, what are you going to do about it? So what? We fucking took everybody to war. So what? What are you going to do about it? We destroyed the Gulf Stream. What are you going to do about it? Here, we're spying on every single person in America and in fact the entire world. And what the fuck are you going to do about it? Absolutely. It's like my parents when we were kids. They could beat the fuck out of us all weekend long, and my neighbors would not do jack shit to protect us. And you know what? That's exactly what's happening on the world. We have adults in the room who are refusing to take action and have integrity. And that, folks, is why I'm on the radio on Call-In Friday talking to myself. The number is 718-717-8296. We have about 5 minutes left if anybody wants to call in. If not, I'll just keep talking, because there's a lot on my heart and a lot on my mind. I am a I don't like to say I'm a child abuse survivor. I'm a child abuse thriver. I decided it was not enough just to survive my fucking parents. I was going to thrive in my life. The reason that I made that decision is because I had 2 children. And I dedicated my life to being a better parent to my children than my parents were to me. I got therapy, I got help, I learned how to do a lot of alternative things. I do EFT on a regular basis. EFT is emotional freedom technique. You can find some really fabulous teachers that will teach you. You can get over insomnia, PTSD. You can bring abundance into your life. Let me see if I can add this call to the group. Somebody is actually calling in. Good morning. You're on the Age of Fission radio show with Lonnie Clark.
Hi, Lonnie. This is Vince. How are you?
Oh, Vince, it's good to hear your voice. I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Doing great. I couldn't let you go the whole show with not one caller.
Oh,
so I just want to call in and say howdy. I made up a little post on it that says because is not an answer, but the beginning of an answer.
That's exactly right.
Because is not an excuse. I'm sorry. Because is not an excuse, but the beginning of an answer.
That's right. That's exactly right. It is not. I mean, we can have all the excuses in the world, but the reality is, and you know what, there's a lot of freedom in deciding to take responsibility. And, you know, you can choose. I had a sister who died at 49 years old. She died as an alcoholic. She was a drug addict and an alcoholic. She chose to ignore the pain that we suffered as children and, you know, self-medicated all of her life and died early. Her life was miserable. And she used to say to me, how did you do? And I'm like, you know what? Because it's easier to face the fire and walk through it and just get over it and accept our lives and accept. I embrace life. My motto is love is greater than fear. And I was raised to be fearful of everything. And when I became an adult, actually when I had children, and my children looked at me with eyes of complete unconditional love, it was the first time in my life I had ever been unconditionally loved. I realized, you know what, I have a responsibility to these people to allow them to grow up to be the full human beings that they were born. I always believe that children are born perfect. If we just stay out of their way, we'd be a lot better off, right? So
that's right. You know, we live in a world that runs on death for its energy. You know, whether it be any kind of mechanical operation or biological, you know, we're requiring fuel. So if you look at gasoline as a fuel as opposed to something coming from a living plant like cannabis, you know, there's less pollution there. When you're a vegetarian, you're getting a cleaner energy than living off of death. And our emotions also, like you said, love is greater than fear, and that's right. You know, of these things, paraphrasing, love is the greatest of all. And I think a positive outlook is definitely it goes a long way in our attitude. So
I agree.
Keep up the great work, Lonnie. I really appreciate what you're doing. You're great to listen to. Lots of good information, fantastic guests. So hey, big love, y'all.
Well, thank you so much, Vince, for calling. I really appreciate your phone call, and thank you for your input. And you know, I really have to say this whole thing is kind of brand new to me. I didn't expect to be doing it. This was not a planned thing, but I appreciate the opportunity to get my voice out because, as you can tell, I think because of my childhood, you know, deciding to thrive post-abuse and really forgiving my parents and loving my parents despite their inadequacies has shown me the way on how we're going to get out of this morass that we're in. We've got 10 seconds. I want to thank everybody for listening. I really appreciate your time, and we'll see you guys on Monday, and put your courage feet on. So it is extreme.